Look at that crack running across your driveway. The one that started as a hairline last winter and now you could lose a pencil in it. You have been stepping over it for months, telling yourself you will get to it. Maybe you already priced out a bag of that gray crack filler at the hardware store. Maybe a contractor already quoted you $800 to grind and reseal the whole slab. Put your wallet away. Because what I am about to show you costs about $2, and it does something that gray filler in the tube cannot do. It does not sit on top of the crack. It goes down inside the concrete and stops the crack from ever coming back. That is the claim, and I know how it sounds. A $2 mix that outlasts the $100 buckets. But this is not a trick and it is not a theory. This is the exact method that highway engineers use to protect concrete bridge decks for decades. And it is the same method Amish families in Pennsylvania have used on their barn floors and their poured walks since before your grandfather was born. The reason you never heard of it is the whole story. And by the end of this, you are going to understand why the people selling you sealer every 3 years would rather you never found out. I want to take you all the way to the end to one specific detail buried in a 1974 transportation research record and confirmed again in a 3-year field study published in 1993. It is the single step that separates a crack that reopens by spring from one that stays sealed for years. Most people who use this mix skip it, and that is why it fails for them. Stay with me and you will not make that mistake. And I want to be clear right now before you talk yourself out of it. This is not for people building a brand new home. This is for the driveway you already have, the cracks you already stepped over this morning. The first time I saw this done, I did not believe it either. I was standing in a barn outside Millersburg, Ohio, in Holmes County, watching an Amish man named Amos wipe what looked like ordinary oil into a crack in his concrete floor with a rag on a stick. I asked him what it was going to cost him to redo it every year. He looked at me like I had asked him something foolish and said he had done that spot once, 11 years back. 11 years. I had a driveway at home I had sealed 3 times in 5 years, and it still looked worse than his barn floor. So let me tell you what he was using and why it works, because the science behind it is not a secret at all. It is just quietly forgotten. The mix is boiled linseed oil, thinned with mineral spirits. That is it. Linseed oil comes from flaxseed. When you press the seed of the flax plant, you get an oil that has an unusual property. It does not just dry on the surface like water evaporating, it cures. It reacts with oxygen and slowly turns into a tough, flexible, water-resistant solid. And because it goes on as a thin oil before it cures, it soaks deep into the pores of the concrete first, and then it hardens down inside. Think about what actually destroys a driveway. It is not weight. Your slab can hold a truck. What destroys it is water. Water seeps into the tiny pores and the hairline cracks in your concrete. Then winter comes, and here is the number that matters. When water freezes, it expands by 9%. 9% does not sound like much until you understand that it happens inside a solid stone with nowhere to go. That expanding ice pushes the crack wider. Every single freeze, every single night, it drops below 32 degrees. Researchers who study this call it the critical saturation point. Once the pores in your concrete are more than about 92% full of water, freezing will crack it. Not might, will. So the whole game, the entire secret to a driveway that lasts 30 years instead of 10, is keeping the water out of the concrete in the first place. And that is exactly what linseed oil does better than almost anything you can buy. It lines the pores. Water hits the surface and beads up and runs off instead of soaking in. No water inside means no ice inside. No ice means no expansion. No expansion means the crack you just filled stops growing. Now here is where the story turns and where you should start to get a little angry. Because this is not folk wisdom that never got tested. This got tested hard by serious people with serious budgets, and then it got quietly shelved. Back in the middle of the last century, state highway departments had a crisis on their hands. They were pouring more salt than ever on winter roads, and that salt was eating their concrete bridge decks alive. Salt water soaks into the concrete, freezes, thaws, and rips the surface apart in sheets. They call it scaling and spalling. Bridges were crumbling decades before they should have. So the engineers went looking for something cheap that could seal the concrete and keep the salt water out, and what they landed on was boiled linseed oil cut with mineral spirits or kerosene. The Oklahoma Highway Department required a linseed oil emulsion on their bridge decks. Engineers expected the treatment to keep working for years as an anti-scaling agent long after it was applied. This was not a fringe idea. This was written into official bridge specifications. Then in the 1970s, the research got even more precise. A transportation research record published in 1974 laid out linseed oil formulations as curing and anti-scaling compounds for concrete, spelling out exactly how to blend the boiled oil with mineral spirits and exactly how to apply it. A few years later, engineers were studying deep sealing of bridge decks with linseed oil to actually stop the steel rebar inside from rusting. They were forcing this oil down into the concrete to protect million-dollar structures, the same oil an Amish farmer wipes into his barn floor with a rag. And then, decades later, somebody did the long-term test that settles the argument. In 1993, a 3-year field and laboratory evaluation of linseed oil as a concrete sealer was published. They tested it against the newer, more expensive commercial sealers, and the result is the part they do not put on the front of the hardware store shelf. Boiled linseed oil mixed with mineral spirits was the most effective sealer at reducing chloride ion intrusion, that is, the salt water. It was also the most effective at reducing surface scaling. And here is the kicker. It stayed effective even after the surface was abraded and soaked in salt water again. The $2 mix beat the expensive stuff in a controlled 3-year study, and it was published in a peer-reviewed journal, and almost nobody ever heard about it. Here is a piece of the history that really got under my skin once I understood it. Before all the fancy sealers, before the epoxies and the silanes and the acrylic buckets, linseed oil was simply the standard. It was not an alternative. It was the thing. Painters mixed it into paint. Woodworkers rubbed it into furniture, and it is still doing that job on antiques 200 years old that outlasted everything made since. Farmers sealed their tool handles and their wagon beds with it. It was in nearly every workshop and barn in America. And it was the go-to protection for concrete and masonry because everyone understood, without needing a chemist to explain it, that this oil went into a surface and hardened there and kept water out. That common knowledge was everywhere. And then, over about 2 generations, it vanished from ordinary life, replaced by products that came in brighter cans with longer ingredient lists and much shorter lifespans on your slab. Now, think about who benefited from that swap. Every time the standard shifts from something a farmer can make to something only a factory can make, somebody who owns that factory gets richer, and you get a recurring bill. That is the pattern, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. It is the same pattern in a dozen corners of your home. The old solution was cheap, durable, and local. The new solution is expensive, disposable, and owned by somebody far away. Nobody announced it. Nobody banned linseed oil. They just stopped mentioning it, let it fall out of the manuals, let a generation grow up never hearing the word, and let the profitable product take the shelf space and the advertising. Silence is the most effective way to bury something. You do not have to fight knowledge. You can simply let people forget. So ask yourself the obvious question. If this was written into highway specifications, tested by universities, and confirmed in print, why is it not the first thing they hand you at the store when you ask about sealing a driveway? Why did the buckets on the shelf get more expensive and more complicated while the cheapest, most proven option got pushed into the back pages of engineering reports? You already know the answer, deep down. There is no repeat business in something that lasts 11 years. There is no brand, no patent, no markup on a jug of pressed flax oil and a can of mineral spirits you can buy anywhere. You cannot build a company selling something a farmer can practically make himself. The commercial sealer that wears off in 3 years and sends you back to the store, now that is a business. Linseed oil was not suppressed by some dramatic conspiracy in a boardroom. It was suppressed by simple economics. It made too little money for too many years of protection, so it quietly disappeared from the conversation, and a more profitable product took its place on the shelf where you would see it. Let me tell you what that crack is actually going to cost you if you keep ignoring it, because I did the math the hard way on my own place. A crack does not stay a crack. It is a doorway. Once water has a way in, every winter it goes to work, and a hairline becomes a 1/4 inch, and a 1/4 inch becomes a gap you can fit your finger in, and then the slab on one side settles lower than the other, and now you have a trip hazard and a lip your snowblower catches on. And when it gets bad enough, the only fix left is to tear the whole thing out. A full driveway replacement in most of the country runs $5,000 to $10,000 right now. $10,000 for something that started as a line you could have sealed for the price of a cup of coffee. That is the real arithmetic here. The $2 is not the story. The $2 versus the $10,000 is the story. Every winter you wait, the price of doing nothing goes up. I want you to really sit with how backwards this is. The most durable, most tested, cheapest protection for the single biggest slab of concrete most families will ever own is a farm oil pressed from a seed. And the reason you did not know that is not because it is complicated. You just heard the whole method. A child could follow it. The reason you did not know it is that nobody with an advertising budget had any reason to tell you. Let me show you exactly how to use it, because knowing the history does nothing for the crack in your driveway. Here is the whole method. First, the crack has to be clean and it has to be dry. This matters more than anything. Get a screwdriver or a wire brush and dig out every bit of loose material, old crumbled concrete, dirt, weeds, the works. Then blow it out or brush it clean. And then you wait for dry weather, bone dry. If there is water hiding in that crack, the oil cannot get in, because the oil and water will not share the same space. Give it 2 or 3 dry days if you can. This is the step people rush, and rushing it is why they think the mix failed them. Second, you mix your oil. The blend the highway engineers used and the one that tested best is roughly equal parts boiled linseed oil and mineral spirits, half and half. The mineral spirits thin the oil down so it flows deep into the pores instead of sitting on top like syrup. For a driveway-sized job, you are talking about a quart of each, and that is where the $2 figure per crack comes from. A gallon of boiled linseed oil treats a lot of concrete. Third, you apply it in 2 coats, not 1, 2. The first coat you flood right into the crack and across the concrete on either side of it. Use a cheap brush, a rag on a stick, a garden sprayer, whatever you have. You want to see it soak in and disappear into the surface. As a rough guide, a gallon covers around 300 square feet per coat. Let that first coat soak in and set up. Then you come back and put a second, lighter coat over the same area. The first coat fills the deep pores. The second coat seals the surface behind it. Now, I need to stop and give you one serious warning, because I would be doing you wrong if I did not. Rags soaked in boiled linseed oil can catch fire on their own. I am not exaggerating. As the oil cures, it gives off heat, and a wadded up, oily rag in a corner of your garage can build up enough heat to burst into flame with nobody near it. This is a real thing that burns down real houses every year. So when you are done, you take those rags and you lay them out flat, single layer, outside on the gravel, or hang them over a fence rail until they are stiff and dry, or you drop them in a metal can with water. You never ever ball them up and toss them in the trash inside. Respect that, and this mix is as safe as it gets. Now, I told you at the start that most people skip one step, and that skip step is why it fails for them. I am going to give it to you at the end, because it is the difference between a seal that lasts 3 years and one that lasts 11 like Amos had. But first I have to tell you about the people who kept this knowledge alive when everyone else forgot it, because that is where I found the rest of it. And this is the part that got me. When I started pulling this thread, I realized the Amish were not just using linseed oil because it was cheap, they were using it because it was theirs. Flax is the plant that gives you linseed oil, and flax is woven into the history of these very families going back centuries. The German and Dutch settlers who came to Pennsylvania in the 17th century, the same stock the Pennsylvania Dutch and the Amish come from, brought flax with them from Northern Europe because they carried the knowledge of how to grow it and press it. Flax was one of the most important crops in colonial Pennsylvania. They grew it for linen thread, and they pressed the seed for oil, and that oil sealed their wood, their floors, their tools, their stone. The knowledge you are watching me explain did not come from a hardware store. It came off a farm, and it has been passed down hand to hand for 300 years by people who never stopped using it while the rest of the country forgot. I keep coming back to that afternoon with Amos, Because the more I learned, the more I realized I had been sold a completely different idea of how a home is supposed to work. I grew up believing that everything wears out and everything gets replaced, and that is just how it goes, and the bills that come with that are simply the price of owning things. That is the water I swam in for 50 years. And then I stood in a barn where the floor was older than my house, sealed with an oil that cost pennies, holding up better than concrete I had paid professionals to pour and paid again to seal. Amos was not smarter than me, he was not richer than me, not by a long way. He just never lost the knowledge that I never had, because his family never let go of it, and mine, like most families in this country, quietly let it slip away sometime in the last 100 years without even noticing it was gone. That is the thing that changed how I look at my whole property now. It is not that the Amish have some magic. It is that they kept doing the proven thing while the rest of us got talked into the profitable thing. And the gap between those two, added up over a lifetime of a home, is thousands upon thousands of dollars and a whole lot of dependence on companies that would very much prefer you never learn what I am telling you right now. That is exactly why I put everything I learned from these families into one place, room by room, because a sealed driveway is one small corner of it. It is called the Complete Amish Home System, and it lays out the same buried, tested methods for heating without a furnace bill, keeping food cold and a pantry stocked without the grid, cooling a house in July, and keeping pests out without a single chemical spray. There is a special, limited time offer on it right now, and you will find it linked down in the description with a QR code you can scan right there on your screen. This crack in your driveway is one taste of a whole archive of things that got quietly pushed aside, and I would rather you have it than the people who profited from you not having it. Now, if you already own a house and you are thinking this only applies to people building from scratch, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. If your driveway, your garage floor, your basement floor, or your front walk was poured before 1980, it was almost certainly never sealed with anything that penetrates, and it has been drinking water and salt for 40 years or more. You do not need a permit for this. You do not need a contractor. You do not need to break anything up. You can walk out this weekend and treat concrete that has been sitting there deteriorating your entire time in that house. Here is what that looks like on an existing slab. Take that same half and half mix, and you do not just treat the crack, you treat the whole surface, because the whole surface is porous and the cracks you have not seen yet are already starting. Wait for a warm, dry stretch. Sweep it clean. Flood the first coat over the entire slab and let it drink. The old, dry, thirsty concrete will pull that oil in fast, and you will watch it darken as it soaks. Then the second coat, a garage floor that has been flaking and dusting for years, will stop shedding after this, because you have finally bound the surface back together from the inside. A basement floor that always felt a little damp will stop wicking moisture up through the slab. This is the repair the previous owner should have done and never did, and it is still not too late. And if you have older poured concrete steps or a porch that is starting to spall, the little chips flaking off the front edge, that is salt and water doing exactly what I described. Treat those the same way and you stop the bleeding. Now I can hear the skeptic in you, because he was alive and well in me too, standing in that barn. Two questions probably came to mind, and I want to answer them before you talk yourself out of this. First, does the oil make the concrete slippery? No, because it is not sitting on top like a wax or a film. It has soaked in and cured inside the pores, so the surface texture of your concrete stays exactly what it was. You are not glazing it, you are impregnating it, and there is a world of difference. Second, does it darken the concrete? Yes, a little, and I want to be honest with you about that. Linseed oil deepens the color of concrete the way water does when it wets a sidewalk, except it stays. It will make a gray slab look like a slightly richer, warmer gray. Most people think it looks better, more finished. But if you have very light decorative concrete, you care about the exact shade of, do a test patch in a corner first and look at it dry. That is just being smart. On a plain working driveway, you are going to like how it looks, and you are going to like even more how it performs. And let me answer the other question I get, which is whether this works on blacktop, on asphalt driveways. This particular mix is for concrete, the gray stuff, poured slabs, walks, garage floors, steps, foundation walls, Asphalt is a different animal with its own traditional care, and I will cover that another day. But if you have concrete anywhere on your property that water touches, this is for it. The apron where your driveway meets the garage, the walk to your front door, the patio slab out back that spalls a little more every spring, the basement floor, the well house. Every one of those is drinking water right now. And every one of those you can shut down for a couple of dollars in an afternoon. You are not going to make 40-year-old concrete look new, but you are going to stop it from getting worse, and you are going to do it for the price of a sandwich. Let me show you how to read your own concrete like Amos taught me to read his, because not every crack is the same, and knowing the difference tells you exactly what to do. Run your eye along the crack. If it is a thin, wandering line that meanders across the surface like a little river, that is a shrinkage crack, and it is mostly cosmetic, the concrete simply drying and pulling on itself years ago. That one, you seal, and the linseed mix handles it beautifully because it wicks right down the whole length of that thin line. But if the crack is straight, and the concrete on one side sits at a different height than the other, that is a settling crack, and that one is telling you the ground underneath moved. You still seal it, but you also have to deal with the water at the edges, or it will keep moving. And if you see the surface itself flaking, little dime-sized chips lifting off, dust coming up when you sweep, that is scaling, that is salt and freeze damage on the surface, and that is the exact condition the highway engineers were fighting when they reached for linseed oil in the first place. Every one of these three problems responds to the same cheap oil, but knowing which one you have tells you whether you also need to look underneath. And here is something almost nobody tells you. The best time to do this is not when the crack is bad. It is when the crack is barely there, when it is still a faint line you can hardly see. Because at that point you are not repairing, you are preventing. And prevention is where this mix truly shines. Seal a young slab, or a slab with just the first faint lines showing, and you may never have a real crack at all because you shut the door on the water before it ever got a season to work. The Amish did not wait for the barn floor to fail. They oiled it new, and they oiled it again every few years for the first stretch of its life, and then it simply lasted quietly for decades while their neighbors in town repoured theirs. But here is where I have to raise the stakes, because sealing the surface is only half of what these families understood. Amos said something to me that I did not catch the meaning of until later. He said, the crack is not the problem, the crack is the symptom. The problem is under the slab, and if you only treat the top, the ground will beat you every time. What he meant is this: concrete cracks because the ground underneath it moves. Water gets under the slab, the soil swells and shrinks, freezes and heaves, and the slab has nothing to do but crack along the weak line. So the old-timers did not just seal the top of the concrete. They controlled the water at the edges, where it sneaks underneath. And almost nobody does this anymore, which is why almost every driveway in America is cracking in the same predictable places. Walk out and look at your own driveway right now, in your mind. I will bet the worst cracks are near the edges, or near the downspout, or at the low spot where water pools after it rains. That is not a coincidence. That is water getting under the slab at its weakest points and heaving it from below. You can seal that top crack 100 times and it will keep coming back because you are treating the symptom while the cause keeps working underneath. This is the thing the tube of gray filler will never tell you, because the tube of gray filler wants you to come back and buy another tube. So the Amish approach was always two parts. Seal the concrete so water cannot get in from the top, and manage the water at the edges so it cannot get under from the sides. They would grade the soil away from the slab so water ran off instead of pooling. They would keep a clean gravel edge along the concrete so water draining down had somewhere to go besides under the slab. Simple, cheap, permanent. No drainage contractor, no plastic pipe system, just understanding where the water goes and refusing to let it sit against your concrete. There is one more layer to this I have to give you, because it is the difference between doing it once and doing it right for the life of the slab. This is not strictly a one and done, and anybody who tells you nothing lasts forever with zero attention is being straight with you. On old, thirsty, previously unsealed concrete, the traditional practice was to treat it, then treat it again the following year, and then let it ride. That second treatment is important on old concrete because the first coat gets swallowed so deep by the dry pores that the surface itself is still a little hungry. 2 seasons back to back, and you have built a reservoir of cured oil down in the stone that keeps working for years. The highway crews understood this. Old concrete, they said, treat it annually at first. New concrete, seal it, and you are set for a good long while. It is the same wisdom Amos used without ever reading a specification, because his grandfather told him, and his grandfather told him, and none of them ever had to buy a bucket of anything to keep a floor whole for a lifetime. Compare that to the treadmill you are on now. Buy the bucket, seal it, watch it wear off in 2 or 3 winters. Buy the bucket again, pay the same money again, do the same work again, forever. That is the design, not a defect, a design. Something that wears out on schedule is not a failure of the product, it is the whole business model of the product. Linseed oil breaks that treadmill, and that, more than any chemistry, is the real reason it disappeared from the shelf where you would have found it. And that brings me back to the one step I promised you at the very beginning, the step almost everyone skips. The detail buried in that 1974 research record and confirmed in the 1993 study, the thing that separates a seal that fails by spring from one that lasts 11 years like the barn floor in Holmes County, it is temperature. And more specifically, it is warmth and dryness working together at the moment you apply it. Cold oil on cold concrete sits on the surface. It never really goes in. It skins over on top, looks like it worked, and then the first hard freeze lifts it right off because it never anchored down in the pores. Warm oil on warm, sun-dried concrete is a completely different thing. The heat thins the oil and opens the pores, and the mix drives deep, sometimes a 1/4 inch or more into the stone, and cures down there where the water lives. That is deep sealing. That is what the engineers were doing on those bridge decks when they talked about impregnation. Not a coating, an impregnation. So here is exactly how you do it, and this is the finale, the whole secret in one move. You pick a warm, dry day, ideally after 2 or 3 days with no rain, when the sun has been on the concrete for hours and the slab is warm to the touch, not hot, not cold, but warm like a stone that has been in the sun. Late morning to mid-afternoon is perfect. You want the concrete itself heated through because it is the warmth of the concrete, not the air, that pulls the oil down. Then you apply your warm half and half mix into that warm, open, thirsty concrete, and you watch it vanish into the surface instead of sitting on top. That is the sound of it working. That single choice, applying it warm and dry instead of whenever you happen to have a free afternoon, is the entire difference between the people who say this mix does not work and the people who sealed a crack once and never thought about it again. The knowledge was always there. It was written into highway specifications and proven in university labs and printed in engineering journals. Then it was quietly buried, because there was no money in something that lasts. One community, the people I sat with in Lancaster County and Holmes County, never stopped using it because they never cared what was fashionable at the hardware store. They just kept doing what worked the way their families had for 300 years since they carried the flax seed across the ocean. And now you have it too. A $2 mix, a warm, dry day, 2 coats, and the water stays out for good. Think about what that really means. It means the crack you have been stepping over is not a repair bill hanging over your head. It is a Saturday afternoon and $2, and then it is done, and it stays done. It means one less thing that the systems around you can charge you for over and over. That is the feeling I want you to have. Not that you learned a hack, but that you took something back that was quietly taken from you. If you are the kind of person who believes that the most honest knowledge is usually the kind nobody can profit from, then you already understand why this got buried, and you already know what to do next. I want to hear from you. Walk out and look at your driveway and tell me in the comments where your worst crack is. Is it by the downspout? Is it at the edge? Is it at the low spot where the water always sits? Tell me exactly where it is, because I read these, and where your crack is tells me exactly what the water under your slab is doing. Do not just nod along and scroll away. Leave the comment. This audience never speaks up, and your one sentence might be the thing that helps the next person save their driveway. And if this opened your eyes, subscribe and stand with the people who are quietly recovering the things that got pushed aside to protect somebody else's profit. This is not about a channel. It is about a whole generation of knowledge that almost got thrown away. Next time, I am going to show you the Amish way of keeping a room warm in the dead of winter with no furnace running and a wood stove that sips fuel instead of gulping it. Using one placement trick, most people get completely backwards. You will not see that one coming either. I will be right here waiting for you.